What are you drinking this morning?
Having a really bad blend of
Coffee.
It's like maca.
Did you make it or buy it?
Buy it. This is a bad buy. This is the last batch of it.
All right. Well, thanks for catching up again today. We tried this before. It broke. Couldn't get it right. Peter, could you pronounce your last name again?
My name is pronounced Pieter Schiettecatte. Pieter Schiettecatte. People call me Peter here.
Yeah.
People try to call me Pieter.
It just doesn't sound right. It's not.
Russian in some way, maybe.
Right. Well, how did you end up in New York?
So I moved to New York almost 5 years ago from Belgium. At the time, I was doing a lot of large-scale construction projects, and most of them were done in CAD. There's some limited use of Revit, but not as much as I would want to.
Right.
And there was a job opening at that time for a firm here to really focus on that, like implementing BIM and see how far we could take the visualization and all that. So that came at the right time. So I jumped on that. I've been there since. So we were interested in moving to Revit, but also keeping all the things that made that SketchUp / AutoCAD workflow great. So we wanted to keep flexibility, and especially wanted to keep design freedom and the ability to walk through the project at any stage and kind of really experience how it feels to walk through that project, rather than just having a few hero renderings that you might only update a few times throughout the process. They actually present the designs a lot of the time by walking through the project with the client. So not just a single series of fixed shots, but really experiencing how these spaces relate to each other and how you move from point A to point B, all that stuff.
No, I haven't seen the new version yet. What's the update?
I think the major thing that I like about the new version is that it fully abstracts the library process. You don't have to go into the folders, because a lot of mistakes that people are made is with it was in a wrong subfolder, or it had to be named in a very specific way where Enscape couldn't find it. And so it was even capital sensitive. And so I had a lot of support requests from people that were just had an issue with that. And so now you don't have to worry about that anymore, and you can manage all your assets from one place. So it just speeds up the process.
How many people do you think are using it right now?
So I put a tracker on the original download link. It's on the other machine. I think around almost 700 downloads on the original one. Then the new one, it was just on the Enscape forum.
Oh, good. That's where you're updating people, is on the forum. Yeah,
but I don't think that particular part that sees a lot of traffic. But then Dan Stein just posted it. So the last time I saw a serious uptick in people reaching out and downloading it after I posted it. So if you come from if you use Enscape in SketchUp, that might not be as a high priority, because you have the SketchUp warehouse that you can use, and SketchUp can take in these different file formats. So you have a lot of content to play with. If you're working in a Revit context, or even Rhino or ArchiCAD, they all have similar problems where there's not a big library. Where
you started a backdoor to try to get custom assets into the library.
Yeah, so at a certain point, it was just our need became so great. There was a very good incentive for us to go out and see what we could do. So at a certain point, we figured out that this stuff has to be cached somewhere. So if we find the cache and can read it and intervene with it, then that opens doors. And so it wasn't that to find the cache. And then for a few days, what we did, we basically modified their assets to make them our own. So that started very basic, but the first test we did was modify the what happens on like the printout on a monitor, so that you don't see like the basic Windows background, but you see the logo of the company.
Right.
That was very simple, but then that kind of, at the same day, we did that, like, let's change the geometry, let's change this, let's change that. And then we figured out we basically could change everything. The only thing that we couldn't do yet was add stuff to the library. That was, so we were limited to kind of taking over their assets, but at a certain point we would run out of assets, and then we would be locked in. And so the very first iteration of the app was just a method of loading in an OBJ, and on the other end came the code for the asset outline. But then the next step, now that we have this, we might as well add description and all the other stuff, because that's a lot easier. So the very first iteration was just basically a form that you filled in. And this new iteration, it's just more visual. You see the thumbnail, so you can kind of really see what kind of asset it is. We also get the list of the entire library, and you do your library management, like deleting assets, renaming them.
Okay.
You do that from the library, so you don't have to do all this tedious process of making folders and subfolders and have correct naming and all that. You don't have to worry about that anymore. So it's very helpful to make your life easier to start off with the right model. And so when you go online and go search for models, a lot of the models will be either very high poly, so a lot of triangles, or they will be pretty complicated. So things that you can download from the website like 3D Sky or Turbo, but often they will have V-Ray materials, Remap Materials, that kind of stuff. So they're perfectly possible to convert to Enscape assets, but it's harder. We've converted Enscape assets from Evermotion, we've done from 3D Sky, SketchUp, SketchUp Warehouse we actually use a lot. There's a whole bunch of them out there, but it helps when you download models to do a check ideally before you purchase them on their the quality, the Polycount, I guess the level of detail that they have. That's a lot of times that will be in the description. Like here you can see 55,000 polygons here.
Is that a lot, or is 55,000 a lot, or what's a good boundary?
Yeah, so like in traditional rendering, when you're doing a V-Ray render, 55,000 is almost nothing. So you often find millions of polygs. However, like Enscape is a different kind of beast. But real-time rendering, Polycount is a bottleneck. So you have a lot less. The recommended amount of polygons is a lot lower than with traditional rendering. Ideally, you can either see the Polycount, or even better, you can see like a wireframe model of this, and so you can kind of judge how many polys you have. So
and you're doing this, you just looked at the Polycount or the wireframe without downloading. You're just doing this directly inside of the browser. We're using Sketchfab at this point. So if no one's familiar with Sketchfab has something like 3 million users. They have close to 500,000 models. They can be downloaded sometimes for free, sometimes paid. But you're just looking at this directly inside of the browser right now. You haven't even downloaded it.
No, that's right. Yeah. So some platforms like Sketchfab, or another example is the SketchUp Warehouse. They actually have the ability to browse and kind of explore models before you even download them in the browser. That's ideal. You really get a sense of what you're going to get, especially if you have to buy a model, and there's no surprises at first. So yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we like to use more Sketchfab and SketchUp Warehouse rather than like the traditional platforms like 3D Sky and Evermotion, because you really can get a sense of what you're going to get before you make that purchase. Also, both Sketchfab and SketchUp Warehouse tend to have, on average, lower polycount models. So they're closer to where you want to get compared to platforms like Evermotion and 3D Sky, which like traditionally have been catering to offline renders like V-Ray, where polycount wasn't such an issue.
Do you have an example of something that you would say don't even use this, or
so
not worth the time?
browsing for a special machine this morning. So this one was actually looking really amazing, really high detail, good design as well. But then when you check out the Polycount below, it's 4.4 million polygons. And you can actually see when you switch on the wireframe, you see some areas are completely white. That means that the triangles are so small there. There's so many of them that it's completely blacked out. And you can actually see when you zoom into an area, you can see that already my machine, the web browser, has a little bit of an issue trying to load it. You can see that every little hole is fully detailed, with probably a few hundred polygons for every little punch. And so if you zoom out, you see many, many, many of those. And so in the context of Enscape, there are much more efficient ways to render this kind of stuff, but you would have to remodel whole sections of this model. And so it would take so much time that it's probably not worth that investment, and it's easier to go to a different model and maybe change the look or the materiality of it a little bit.
Right. If you were going to use this in one room as a set dress space, not an entire building, not dozens or hundreds of times, but just in one space, could you use this, or would it make the model really heavy? Yeah, so there is an upper limit for Enscape assets, but it's pretty high. You would have to be very detailed before you hit that limit. That said, you have to look at the total budget of your project. Although in one, using this once in one room, eventually Enscape will load it and you're probably still fine. But every time you load that room, it will need to load that asset into memory. So every time you launch an Enscape, it will now be a little bit slow. And so do that enough, and you get these slow projects. So I actually recommend people, especially for things like this that are likely to be reused in other projects, if they're set dressing, to try to be exercise some restraint there, to keep things optimized, right? We don't want Enscape launches that take minutes and minutes to do. We want to try to keep those fast and flexible. Okay, so good. So we've got something that we're going to download. Walk us through the download process of how you would, once you found something that you like, it's got a poly count that is appropriate. What specific download format are you going to use? Yeah, so internally, Enscape uses the GLTF format, which is an open source alternative to FBX. So a little bit what you could say. FBX is a little bit on the way out, and GLTF as an open source format from the developed by the same guys that developed OpenGL. So they know what they're doing. That is what Enscape uses. However, like that file format is optimized to be fast to render. It's not great to work with in any 3D program. So for the most part, we will have to modify these assets in some way to make them good for Enscape. And so usually you want to find another file format other than GLTF that is a little bit more friendly on the import. On the import side. So we'll download GLTF, but then on the import side, you might use a different format for optimization purposes. Yeah. So like what we'll typically do, like my program that I use to create these things is Blender. So I will look for a file format that I know plays well with Blender. So that could be an FBX or an OBJ. Those are the two most likely formats that we'll try to get. So let's download this one. If there's different options, we'll see those, I suppose, and we'll see which one you want to download. Yeah. So I'm logged in to SketchUp, so that's the Polygon 3D model. So I have the FBX here. It's going to convert the original format automatically to GLTF. I'm going to go for the FBX here because I want to import that into Blender. And good. Good. So you could download GLTF and possibly use this without a lot of post-production. But if you want to optimize it, if you want to clean it up, if you want to do useful work, it's better to go with FBX to download in the original format. Yeah, exactly. So I've downloaded the zip here. I'm going to extract it. Then I'm now switched to Blender. So the reason I use Blender is it's free and open source, and it's a really high quality
program. And there's a lot of tutorials and YouTube videos and everything about it. So it's really, it's great to learn. And it also has a very active development. Let me import the FBX here. FBX. So you can see the materials of objects by going through this motion, viewport shading. That will set up like a default lighting setup in HDRI map, and then you can see this. And so unfortunately, you can see that the materials have not come in.
Is this pretty common? If you download something, you find out that the materials may not come in, don't panic. There's a way to resolve this.
Yeah, so it's unfortunately, it happens quite often. Sometimes like the creator of the asset might have exported it in the wrong way. It's not necessarily a huge deal to fix this, depending on how complex the model was. So we can actually see when we downloaded the model, we got a bunch of textures with it here. So we can. So this is the color map of the scale or the plate, if you will. So that we'll definitely want this guy, and then these three are the maps to recreate the pizza. And then this is an ambient occlusion map. You can see here underscore AO. That is not something that Enscape really loads. So we don't even have to worry about that one. So let's get going on fixing this. So when I work on materials, I want to switch to the shading tab. That's kind of a workspace. All these different tabs, by the way, at the top here are different workspaces. They're like laying out different viewports optimized for a certain tab. And so when I want to work on materials, it's the shading tab that I want to go at. Where at the top I get my 3D viewport, and at the bottom I get my materials. So first off, and then start by selecting the scale. That's probably the easiest. And so you can see that there's not even a material here. If there was a material, it would show up. So I'm going to make a new material here. So
it's kind of contextual. If there's a material, you select something, you should see information about what you selected.
Yes, yeah. So it's just for an example, just change this to kind of red color. You can see that.
Oh, nice. There. Okay. Yeah. Separate.
So when I switch to the pizza, you will see it will load a different material. And so we don't want to use the color. Obviously, we want to bring in a map. And very easy way to bring in a map is just by dragging it in here, and one will take care of the importing and setting settings, right? And then you just connect the color to the base color, and then give it a second to look, and then you should see the plate material has.
Okay.
So let's say we're happy with this. So
we'll do one at a time. Okay, good.
Yeah. Let's bring this one in, and then let's bring the glossiness map in, and let's bring the normal map in. So let's start off with the color. That kind of has the biggest impact, obviously. But look for a second. There we go. And you can see that the crust is mapped to the crust, and the green is mapped to the leaves.
Nice. Okay. So at this point, if we wrapped up the materials, what would be the next step?
So we would, now that we know that we're going to get the materials working, I would switch to the layout tab. It's kind of your default modeling space. I would check the orientation of the model. So where is it relative to the origin? The origin will be your insertion point of the asset. So you want to make sure that it's like on the ground plane and not like a few feet below the ground plane, and that it's nicely centered on it. And I can see that my asset is not really neatly in the middle. It's kind of offset to the side. So I'm going to select both the plate and the pizza here, switch to move to. Then I get these little arrows that I can use to move them. So that's for the top view. And then if we switch to the side view, we can actually see that it's below the ground plane. So we definitely want to get both. And then we want to definitely make sure that it's on the ground plane.
And you're using that little red line of the ground plane to kind of set the origin for the bottom of the plate.
Yes. So now my object is in the correct position. Now I want to make sure that the scale is right. And so there's a little sidebar where you can see the scale of the object, and you can toggle it on with hitting the N key. And then go to item, and then you can see the scale here. And so you can see this pizza, it's pretty big. It's like the plate is actually 1.2 meters across. That's way too big, so we'll have to scale it down. So I recommend just staying in meters.
Stay in meters, right.
Yeah, Blender by default is also in meters. It's just easier that way. Maybe someday there will be unit support, but for the time being, you're going to have to do the math in your head.
So what's the dimension of a pizza plate in meters?
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I would think about like 0.3 meters, like 30 centimeters, around that, maybe a little bit more, 35 centimeters, something like that.
Yeah, good.
So we could either now move to the scale tool, and so we can use this little gizmo, or we could use the S command, which scales it. But you can see that the scaling happens around the origin of the object.
Oh, not from the base of not from the ground plane. Gotcha.
Exactly. And so there's actually a trick that we can do to solve that. If we select both the objects and do Control A, we have an option that's called Apply All Transformations. And that, without getting too technical, that will reset the origin of the objects to the origin of the scene.
Okay. So you can scale it, but the origin is maintained.
Yes. And so I applied to transfer. You can see that my gizmo has reset to where I want it to be, right? Scaled from the origin of my scene right here. So now if I scale, you can see it scales as expected.
And it's giving you some real-time feedback with regard to the dimensions as you scale it. So you're not typing in a value necessarily. You're just scaling it visually.
Yeah, you could type in a value here. In this case, I don't have a proper reference. So I'm just going to go a little bit
about 0.3.
eyeball. So, yeah, maybe a little bit like this is probably fine. And now apply transformations again, because we want to, here where it says scale, we want it to be, these three values should be set to 1. So it's very easy. You just select everything, Control A, all transforms. You can see nothing has changed, but internally my model has changed so that these values are now 1. So we definitely want to check out, one, how many polys there are, and whether it's necessary for us to reduce it and how that's done. With the new Blender, it used to be in the old Blender that you could see the statistics here of how many polys were in the scene, etc. That has now moved. So if you're using a new Blender, this is where you can find it. You can open up this overlay panel here of your viewport, and you check statistics. So you see here triangles. This is the thing that we need to keep an eye on. And so 55,000 is a lot for just the pizza. So let me go through my favorite way of reducing this, and it's pretty quick. So first off, I'm going to also enable in the same overlay panel wireframe, so I can see what I'm doing. One way to see how many polys each object has is by isolating it. So by Shift 8, you're isolating an object. And you can see that the pizza actually has a majority of the polys, right? Almost 50,000. Alt H will bring everything back again. And so let's isolate the plate. That's only 5,000. So we really want to be looking at the pizza first.
Okay.
Alt H, there we go. So I'm selecting the pizza now, modify here, the decimate one. The one that we will be looking at. So by default, I want to be on the collapse mode. And so this is a percentage. So 1 is 100%, then 0.5 is only keeping 50% of the polygons. So at this point, I generally turn off my wireframe because I want to be able to see what the effect is when this is kind of in a render mode, right? Is it clear that I'm am I going too low?
Right.
I could start the slider down. You will see that it starts to calculate. And you can see here and there certain things are changing. Right?
Right. How much arugula texture do we need?
Yes. But you can, if you would look at this model, you probably don't see a difference. One thing I would say is that the smaller an asset is, the fewer polygons that you have. So like a car should have more polygons than a cup of tea. I generally, from our assets, I try to keep 20,000 as a hard limit, and I try to never go over that. Okay. And so if an object is very small or very simple, it should be well below that. It also depends on are you likely to run this model in VR or not? Because then performance really becomes critical.
So if we're at 55,000 polygons for a pizza, then we have to reduce it under 50% to get that below 20,000.
This is 10%, and you can see that I'm still pretty fine, right?
And now we're at 10,000, little more than 10,000 triangles.
Yes.
Okay.
I can, because it's really quick and easy to test this, I can maybe I can get away with display, but only half the polygons. And this actually looks still pretty fine. So you can actually go a little bit further and kind of try out until you see, when you start to see like weird issues where there's like weird shadows on it, then you know you've gone too far. And so one thing with modifiers is that similar to where we want to apply all the transformations in a previous step, we want to apply the modifiers so that they're a part of the model, because the exporters don't always take into account the modifiers. So there's a little button here, apply, and so now that has been applied to the model, and this speeds us forever low poly. And so now what I'm going to do is to the side, I'm going to make a low poly version of this. There's a few ways to do this. This is for the placeholder geometry. Select these objects and then do Shift D, that creates a copy. And then I'm going to do X for the X axis. So now I move in this axis right here.
You're just moving it off to the side so you can see it.
Exactly. And so I'm going to move it 1 meter to the right. And so it's here right now. And so this version I'm going to make into low poly asset. And when I'm done, I'm going to move it back. So first I have 2 different objects. I want to be working on them as a single object for the placeholder. So I'm going to multi-select both objects. You can just drag a little box. And then Control J will make them into one big object. Okay. And so next, I like to make this white so that I can see it as an asset. Because the assets in Enscape are now going to have, or the placeholders of Enscape, like the little placeholder geometry that you get when you place an asset, that will not have a material. So I want to simulate the same scenario here. So if you select your object and go to materials, this little wall here, you can just remove the materials here with the minus. That gets you a little white look. And then in addition, I'm also going to right click on it and do shade flat. Because again, Enscape assets are not going to be smoothed, they're going to be faceted, right? And so you again want to recreate the same condition here. And now I'm going to just test whether I can use the same methods here with decimate to go a lot down. So maybe I'm at 6,600 now for placeholder geometry. I try to go below 500. I'm going to select the pizza and hit tab. That goes into edit mode. What I generally do is first apply a voxel remesher. And let me show you how it works. So if you go to remesh and turn on voxel, and so that kind of, it will basically put little cubes in your model. I will try to rebuild the model based on little cubes. So you get very, very clean topography or very predictable topography. And so if you have models where the remeshing isn't working out well, this is a great way to fix that. And so you can see I kind of get the rough shape. Maybe I can have my voxels be a little bit larger. So the larger your voxels are, the less detail it's going to be, right? And so now on top of this, I can do decimate. And now the decimate is going to be much more reliable. And so you can see here, it can now go well beyond the 1,000 where I was getting trouble last time. Right. I'm under 500 already. So maybe this is something that I'm happy with.
They're roughly the same size, so they're in the same location when you move it back.
Yes, exactly. So now you can kind of see whether that will work for you for your placement needs. Like some objects that need to be placed very precisely will need a more detailed placeholder than objects like this, where it doesn't really matter whether you move it half an inch to the left or the right. So you want to apply the modifiers from the top down. So start here, then work your way down, and that should be, there we go.
All right.
So now we have the asset. I like to move the placeholder to different layers. Layers in Blender are called collections, so that it's easy to turn them back on and off. So a little trick, if you have an object selected, you can hit M to move it to a collection. You can say new collection, placeholder, OK, and then you will see it appear here. And now you can turn it off, on and off here. We can actually do the same for the pizza here. Pizza. Now we can turn things on and off more easily. I think we're all set to export this right now. So we will need two things out of Blender. We will need a GLTF file, that is the file that Enscape is going to use to render it. And then we will need an OBJ file, and that will determine the placeholder geometry in your application. So when you place it in Revit or SketchUp or Rhino, let's first start off by hiding the placeholder, selecting the object you want to export to GLTF. And then we can go to File, Export, GLTF. And then this is where you are going to export it to GLTF. So very important here to get your settings right, otherwise this will not work. So first of all, you want to switch this to GLTF separate. That's the file format that Enscape uses. And then you want to also remember export settings so that you don't have to set this every time.
Right.
So let's go through the different panels here. I tend to say selected objects so that I don't accidentally also export my placeholder geometry of other stuff that I might have in the scene. And then I don't need any of these things, so I can turn that off. Again, the transfer should be left by default. And then here, we want to uncheck vertex colors. We don't need that. But we want to check apply modifier. So if we forgot to apply a modifier somewhere, it will still try to apply it. This doesn't always work very well, so it's always to apply them yourself. But this can be kind of a safeguard for if you forgot something. And then here, we want to make sure that animation, CAPs, and skinnings, or none of these things we actually need. So I'm going to go to my pizza folder, make a subfolder here called exports, and then save that in here. So pizza. It's also never use spaces in your file paths. Neither in your textures nor in your assets, because Enscape doesn't support that for assets. So export LTF, give that a second. So once this black dot goes away, it will be exported.
So this is just the geometry for what Enscape needs to see. We have to do the same kind of thing for the placeholder geometry that Revit sees?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We can save all these settings in Blender. So I'm going through them step by step, but once you set this up, this can be as quick as hitting Q, GLTF export, Q, OBJ export. And so now let me enable my placeholder, select this thing. Just to be sure, I'm going to go Control A, all transforms. So that has reset that transform thing again. And so I have saved my OBJ, my quick menu, so I can do Q wavefronts, but I can also do File, Export, Wavefront. That's the OBJ file format.
Okay.
That, and then I'm going to go to my pizza again, exports. And so here, the settings I use, again, is selection only. That should be on. OBJ objects should be on. And then here, it's very important to have triangulate faces on. Definitely, you shouldn't include any normals, any UVs, because that is all ignored. So let's make for a smaller file format here. We can do pizza.obj.obj, pizza.obj, export, and that will export it. So now we have all the files that we need. So now it's time to launch the Enscape asset creator. So this is the newest version, 1.3, which I currently call it the beta because I want to be sure that some people have tested it and report back that it's working as expected. But as far as I can see, it works fine. So your first step is loading in the library. So if you haven't set up a library yet, you want to make a folder somewhere in your network that everyone can reach. So my library is here.
So everyone needs to be able to see these assets if they're going to render them across multiple computers. So that's why you're setting up a central asset library?
Yeah, so what will happen otherwise is if I place an asset that is from a library that I only can see and you launch the project, Enscape will tell you that it couldn't find some assets, and those will just not be rendered. So I pointed it to the folder that has all my assets. You can see we have 401 right now. And so we could, like, let's say we want to modify this asset. Maybe we want a different description. We could do that here. We could upload a new thumbnail. We could put it in a different category. We could do a bunch of stuff here, right? And so you can also see that if we port here, one, how many polygons the placeholder has, and also how heavy, quote unquote, your GLTF and your textures are. And so if you reach above a certain limit, still color red. Let's try to find one that wasn't done as properly. So you can see here, this one is considered too detailed. This is a 5 megabyte GLTF file. That's probably a little bit too much for.
Okay.
So
it just highlights it in red to give you a sense that, oh, maybe this one needs to be looked at again.
Yeah, and then so if somehow something went wrong, maybe like the GLTF, you forgot to add your part of the GLTF files, it will also color red. So it's not only performance, but also if some type of file is missing, it will also show you that in red.
Okay.
So let's make a new one, new asset. And so first thing we need is a unique number. And so the easiest way to create that is by hitting this button. It will create a unique number for you. What you do not want to do is type in something here because this is expecting a very specific format. And so you want to use this button instead. And then asset name, it should be pizza. And then reuse the default categories. These are the categories that Enscape has. Yeah, so let me just, as an example here, add food. And so now it's time to load the GLTF file. I have my pizza model, my exports. So this will filter out only to the relevant file formats. So I can just do drag select. Like notice that it doesn't show the .obj, although I did upload it here.
Yep, it's in there, but it doesn't see it.
Yeah, and so immediately it will warn me your textures are really big. And so I will come back after this to fix this. But for now, I'll just keep it as is. And then I recommend keeping this on. There's a little issue with the GLTF implementation in Enscape where it doesn't follow the standard spec 100%. So this is here while that bug is around in Enscape. I will keep this feature around. And so if you check that box, it will fix the GLTF. It will actually break the GLTF in a way that Enscape can read it. And so now if we didn't have an OBJ file and we would just be fine with a box to represent this object, we would fill in the size here in meters. And then OBJ file.
But we have an OBJ file, so you then select that option, select the OBJ file, and that gives you your geometry for your outline. Exactly.
And so we'll tell you whether the OBJ loading has succeeded and whether the polycount is acceptable. So if you go any higher than 500 here, this will color red as well. So just let you know. It will let you do it, but it will warn you that it's probably not a good idea. And then we could upload a thumbnail. I haven't rendered it yet, so I don't have anything to add here. So for now, it's going to be black. And so if everything goes well, if I hit save now, it should be added to the library. And there we go. So I can find it now under. So let's see whether it came up from the Revit library. So I'm in Revit right now. Let me show you how to enable the library, the custom library, right? Because by default, you'll just see Enscape's library. So to set up Enscape so that it can read a custom library, you just need to change one little file in your install directory. So what you want to do is go to your C drive, go to users, find your username, and then you want to find the app data folder. If you can't see the app data folder, it's probably because hidden folders aren't on. You can go to view, show hidden items here, enable that, and it should pop up. Then go to app data, local, Enscape, and you should see Enscape config file here. And so just open that up with a text editor like Notepad. If you open this for the first time, there would be false. You can just remove that and say true. And then if you launch your Revit and then go to general settings, there will be a new tab here called developer. Click on that.
Which you have that's general settings, not visual settings, general settings.
Yeah, general settings, correct. And so you can set this now to mixed. You can ignore local. You can set it to mixed, and then you can assign a folder, and that folder is your location of your asset library, the same folder that we loaded into the asset creator.
And why mixed? Is that allowing you to see both the Enscape and the custom assets?
Yeah, that's correct. So if you set it to the local, it would render only local assets. And if you had a tree from the Enscape library place, it would ignore that. And so mix is a much more useful setting for us, at least, the way we use this. One thing you'll have to remember is once you start using local custom assets, is that you always want to render, if you're running Enscape, you're rendering from Enscape, you always want to put it on mix, because remote will only render Enscape standard assets, not your custom assets. Once I set it to mix and I open up my asset library, the asset library itself will load assets from your custom library. So if you want to place an asset from the standard library, you just go to your developer tab, switch it temporarily back to remote, open the asset library, place the stuff from the standard library that you want, then come back here and put it back on mixed. That's how we've been using it. So let me set it on mixed. And now if I open the asset library and everything went well, I should see my pizza in here. So if you have a lot of assets, just like with the standard asset library, it can take a while to load. There it is. So we spawned it at 2 assets, so it did load. If I go to new here, I can see my pizza. I didn't include a thumbnail, so it's black, so that is as expected. We can update that later. So let's place this pizza.
And this will show the placeholder geometry initially.
That is correct.
Okay.
So let me just add a chair next to it, just for the as a test. If this doesn't show up, the chair should show up.
Okay, so the scale is appropriate.
Yeah. So that was a success. So far so good, I would say. So let's launch Enscape. See what we got here. So I should say that this asset is still using 70 megabytes of textures. That's way too much. So I should go in and downsample the textures.
Gotcha.
Reduce the resolution on that. I can do that at any time.
But you can do that in Photoshop. You don't have to reopen the asset. You're just changing the material.
Exactly. You're just modifying the map. Also, if you want to, let's say you made a chair and the ladder fabric isn't working out really well, you can just modify that texture without exporting everything. It's actually a pretty convenient workflow.
Do you have to modify all of the textures? You know, because there was the displacement. What different materials were in there?
So let me just show you. So for modifying the assets, you've got two options right here. You could go back to the exports folder. Let me just maximize it. This, if you remember, this is where we stored all the exports that came from Blender, right? And so one option is to modify them here, like open the texture map, say them here, and then go here and say override GLTF files and load them back in again. The modified files, and that will override in the library. You can also go directly into your library. That is here. So the name of the folder of the asset is going to be automatically generated based on the category plus the name. So in this case, I'm looking for accessories_pizza.
So this is your local asset library.
Yes. As you can see, over time, we've already built quite a few, and we're actually planning to add a lot more. So if you go into subfolders, you will find the GLTF files here. And so you can also directly modify them here.
Oh, you could just open them here, and you don't have to update or override it through the asset library tool. You're just updating them here.
So you could do right click, and so in my case, it's pretty easy. Right click, open with Photoshop, and then you change the resolution. You can see all these maps are actually pretty big. This one is the biggest culprit, but each one of both these are also too detailed to make sense in this context. So I probably want it to be under a megabyte.
But you would do it for all of them.
Yeah, I would run a batch converter on this folder. And so you can see it's now loaded into Enscape, and the materials have come in. You can see if I go really close up, I can see it's a little bit triangulated, but what I'm expecting to render it at is at this size, and it is totally fine. If you find that it's too coarse, you can just use a little bit more polygons in Blender, or not reduce it as much, and it will be fine.
Okay, so you've actually
rendered
rendered it out with your own.
With Enscape.
With Enscape, you're creating the thumbnail. Oh, good. Okay, so you're just overriding the other one or updating it.
Yeah, and so now if everything works as expected, it's just loading my entire library. Like the first time you open it up, it always.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Oh, that's great, Peter. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Any other kind of good practices that you would use, best practices?
I think the main thing that I've seen is people using very, very detailed models. And a lot of the issues that you're seeing with that is trying to load in an asset that's very high poly and use it as is. That is, in this kind of workflow, it isn't going to work very well. Okay. Especially not on a scale where you're building your own library and you're reusing assets a lot. It is worth putting in a little bit of extra time, and it can help with starting off with a good asset. So an asset that's closer to the Polycount that you want to.
Are there pros and cons of using photogrammetry assets versus things that are deliberately modeled?
So photogrammetry assets aren't necessarily bad, and actually, a lot of photogrammetry assets will have a very even triangulation. And so when we use the decimate modifier, that particular modifier works very well in those kind of situations.
For photogrammetry.
Yeah, because the mesh is very uniform.
Okay.
It isn't a very clean mesh, but it is a very uniform mesh. And so the modifiers like a decimate work pretty well on them. So like, for example, we've used equal scans, some actually that we made our own. And you have a very high, you can have a million polycount on those, but those will come down very well using the decimate modifier. You can go to 0.001% as like very extreme values, and it will still work pretty well.
Okay.
So yeah, photogrammetry isn't necessarily bad. It's just if you try to use it as is, it might be a little bit hard. It would take about 5 to 10 minutes probably to create an asset. If you once you have the muscle memory, once you set up the system, that the settings are saved a little bit, and you have the quick access menu and you know the shortcuts, it can be pretty quick. And so what I tend to do as well is kind of collect. Oftentimes we end up needing to have a whole series of assets. We just bought a package of 20 books, or like collections of books, stacks of books that we want to add to a library. We bought a package of 20 people that are using gym equipment for a project. And so I tend to do them in batch. And then the time that it takes per model goes down drastically because you're reapplying the same settings to every model. So I set up one model well and just copy the settings to all the other ones. And then it goes pretty quickly.
Even if you buy them, you still have to clean them up and do some post-production on them.
It might work out of the box, but oftentimes you end up with not a very optimized way. We use our library so often that I want the library to be optimized so that people don't have to worry about using stuff in the library.
Is this something that you're doing in your company? Are you doing this yourself, or do you have other people that help you?
We're hoping that more people will come up with the skill sets so that potentially we can outsource a little bit of this.
Okay. If there's any questions, we'll just put them in get people to ask questions in the comments below. I'll put this on a LinkedIn page and then links to the videos from there with these various steps.
The quarantine kind of helped we got
the quarantine helped.
Yeah. I wanted to be productive with my time being locked up all the time.
Right.
Not being able to go out much in the weekends here in the city, and now it's better. But for a few months, it was people who were spending a lot of time indoors.
Right.
I learned Blender and C# programming, and this was kind of a good way to do something constructive with that project. Right. Real world apps.
So considering all this work that you've done, this labor of love, if you had a feature request for the Enscape team, and they put your request at the top of the list, what would you ask for?
So we've been using it for a year. The thing that has come up the most is always, I love his asset, the material isn't working for this.
Right.
A lot of different things. So a lot of the stuff is just, it's part of the design. So we have this couch or this chair, we want to test out different finishes on it. So that happens very often. But even if you're not, this stuff isn't in scope necessarily. So let's say you're doing base building architecture and the furniture is just there to make it look more attractive.
Right.
The particular fabric might just be not working well with the background. And so sometimes you have assets that would work really well, but like the color is just off and things are bleeding into each other. And so that is just, that would make our ability to design better. And that has to be our
Right.
Because in the end, all this is to make better projects. Once we've like framed everything and like have the sun into right angle and everything, that we just could do like save entire view and not just camera position. And also, like, once you have a camera position, you can't update it. You need to make a.
Oh yeah, I would love to be able to go back into Revit. If you have to tweak something slightly, it keeps all of the other conditions.
Sounds like you said, like with the hotspot, you want like. That might sound trivial, but moving the sun a little bit over, I want to be able to, once I have
to go back and save it on top of the old view.
Yeah, so very likely what you'll need to do next week is update that rendering.
What do you think that for your tool, you're at version 1.3 now?
Yeah.
And so I suppose you're already planning, or you have a spreadsheet somewhere? Or it's in your head. What's coming?
Well, it really depends on what Enscape is going to do or announce. Like, if they don't announce it, it's hard for me to. I'll just have to guess what they'll do and try to be complementary to it.
Right.
But also what the user feedback is. A lot of this stuff that was added based on user requests. So
users are asking you for features. Yeah. Okay, and the best place for them to do that is just with a personal email or via the forums, or? Yeah,
any route will work. The Enscape forums is a good place.
Okay. What food or drink do you miss from Belgium?
Fries.
No, really? Fries?
Yeah.
You can't get good fries in Belgium. I mean, in New York.
Not as good, no.
So it's not the beer, it's not some food, it's fries.
Yeah, Belgian fries with beef stew.
On the fries?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Every time I go into the Enscape gallery, I'm equal parts inspired and intimidated. Like, it's extraordinary what people do, and it's not even the rendering so much as it is the attention to detail and set dressing that goes into creating a rendering to make it look so beautiful and natural. And you're doing this to allow that to occur more. Look, no, thank you very much, Peter. Keep in touch, and I wish you all the best. You know, when people buy an application, when they use an application that solves a problem, or, you know, that's one thing. But when there is a community of people that love an application, this is really, really interesting. So I appreciate this labor of love, and I think it's going to open up a universe for Enscape users to be able to do amazing things.